just you get to choose. Right? Like here's the scenario. The environment gives us something which can be perceived as negative, can be perceived as not working, can be perceived as problematic. The world's ending. But we get to choose to see it like that, or we get to choose to see it as an opportunity.
So clearly that it's my responsibility now to do that for other people. If I have information and, other people's success is my success and vice versa.
Because you know what? Like, the challenges or the roadblocks are the journey themselves.
There's no big things. It's all little things compounding on top of each other. Dr. Candace Campbell is a nurse consultant who works with corporate and individual clients to achieve peak performance cultures and success. Her nursing CV includes clinical, administrative, and academic work. Candy, as her friends call her, is also an award-winning actor, author, and filmmaker. As an actress, she has appeared on stage, film, radio, and TV. She was also the co-founder of an improv and stand-up comedy group, the Barely Insane Players, which led to 3 one-person shows, including the latest, An Evening with Florence Nightingale, a reluctant celebrity. Among other things, we chat about pivotal moments in our life and contemplate the concept of serendipity during this week's conversation. Hear what Candy has to say about both the art and the science of success and how she blends them together for positive system change on this week's episode of Truth Seekers. All right, welcome to another episode of Truth Seekers with Coach Nick Davies and myself, Coach Josh Greco. We have Candy joining us today. Candy, thank you so much for joining Truth Seekers.
My pleasure.
Yeah, so I'm excited to bring you in on today's conversation. You have a very unique background, and I'd love for you to just introduce yourself and give us maybe the quick synopsis, because there's so much there, and then we'll dive in a little bit deeper.
My publicist says I should say this. I'm an international speaker, an award-winning actor, author, and filmmaker, and I work with corporations and individuals who want to increase their emotional intelligence in life and just have a better life personally and professionally. I'm also a certified grief counselor.
Like I said, so much there. So that point about emotional intelligence has come up on previous episodes before.
I know that.
Yeah, what does that mean to you? Why is that a passion of yours?
That's kind of a long story, but I will start by saying that my first degree is in theater. And my goal at the time was to be a repertory actor. And if you know anything about the acting business, it's really hard to make a living without taking off your clothes. So when I had a director at the time, approached me in a non-professional way, shall we say, I think they call it a Me Too moment now. I basically walked off the show, and I did not continue with acting for many years. And so therefore, I had to figure out, what was my passion? What did I want to do? All I knew was that I liked being around people. I'm kind of an introvert, or maybe you would call that an ambivert. I definitely am one of those kinds of people that needs alone time, but definitely like being in a community and serving people. And so I also like to travel. And I didn't know what to do. And I took some sort of rudimentary job. And one day my mother came in with the newspaper. Remember those?
Yeah.
And she said, hey, there's an ad here. And it says they're interviewing for flight attendants for Pan Am. And why don't you go down? And I knew that I had already traveled to Europe my junior year in college, and I liked traveling. I speak a couple of other languages, and I liked doing that. I liked doing dialects as an actor. And I thought, well, at least if I could do that job, I could travel all around. I had this list of things I wanted to accomplish before I was 30. And maybe some people do that. And travel was right up there in the first 3. And I also thought, well, I really wanted to go ahead and do some more study of acting. So I'm going to study dialects as I go around the world. And I did. What surprised me, though, was that I got what I call the call to be a nurse while I was 30,000 feet up on a flight from New Delhi, India to Karachi, Pakistan, when all the people in the back of the 747 where my colleague and I were serving them, they all got sick at once. And we witnessed ribbons of vomit. It was not a pretty sight. It was a lot of turbulence. And so that day, I realized that there are sort of two kinds of people in the world. There's those that run to help and those that run to hide. And she ran to hide and I ran to help. And when it was all over, we had been joking about different things. And coincidentally, I had helped a passenger that day with some oxygen who was having some respiratory difficulties, and met some other flight attendants who were nurses who asked if I was a nurse. This whole theme started coming up, And when I told my colleague, she says to me, how did you do that? I can't even stand to be around it. And there you were passing out blankets and, helping people. I said, well, if it wasn't so sad that people were sick with that ribbons of vomit, it's kind of artistic. And she said, you have that sick sense of humor. You really should be a nurse. So that was the first thing. And what I realized right away was that it's all about story and relationships. There's a story in everything that we do. And those of us who are truth seekers, who are looking for our path in life, we realize it's not a sprint, it's a journey. And I'm the kind of person who believes that we cross paths with people for a reason. And as a nurse, it was very clear that there are some people who will let you into their world and other people who are more standoffish. As a clinician, and then as a person who was certified in grief counseling, I had to do that as a nurse in my specialty, that you learn that in order to make a relationship with another person, you have to be vulnerable and authentic yourself.
Mm. So key. I like what you said about making sense of the people who come into your lives. And Coach Nick and I can actually attest to this. Just yesterday, we literally just played back the first voicemail that we left for each other and our coaching endeavors. We were kind of going through it at the same time. He was maybe a couple of months ahead of me. But looking back on it, that was quite a while ago. Here we are, all these episodes deep in our podcast together. But to reminisce on that moment, because that's so key, right? We can very quickly brush over the moments that those things occurred to us, or that the tide turned. Like you mentioned, you said there's those that run to help and those that run to hide. Like that's such a great line, right? Because it's a moment in time, or an event diverges people diverge in two different directions, and it becomes clear to you. And at that moment, the rest of your life kind of lays out in front of you. Did you find that to be true?
Oh, yes, indeed. As a matter of fact, when I was teaching about this in just a couple of weeks ago, and I was thinking to myself, as an example, some of the things that we love to do as voyeurs is go to a movie, right? Or watch TV, whatever. But you notice that the best TV programs, the best movies have a great story of people who are relating. And I think it's interesting if you study romantic comedies, for instance, and boy, there's a lot of them on right now because we're recording this during Christmas. So there's lots of Christmas romantic comedies on board. And they always have an interesting catch, and that is that two people who otherwise probably their paths wouldn't have cross paths, and for some odd reason one of them reaches out And sometimes it's a sarcastic or snipey or weird way, but they're vulnerable with another person in a sort of authentic way. And the other person twigs on that. They have a bonding that is something that is very difficult to pin down, but it's the beginning of a relationship. And so whether it's personal or professional, when we let down our guard a little bit, then we're able to create a relationship. And that is the sort of thing that Goldman talks about in his emotional intelligence work about what to do. The improv part is the how to do it.
Wow, thank you so much, Candy. So much stuff to play around with. And as I'm furiously taking notes and letting all these things kind of percolate in my mind, I wonder what to ask you because I've got so many questions. It's really interesting to think about those, the story, the love, the struggle, the vulnerability, the bonding. I think about the hero's journey and kind of doing that with someone else. If you get that catalyst moment where people always bond when most people change, I believe, when there's something external from them, a catalyst moment which pushes change. And that happens with two people. When that moment happens, you share that moment. I think a lot of what we do as coaches is to try to create those moments. And so therefore we can incite the change, if you will. And that's what's really interesting to me. And so I think about that vulnerability you talked about. I normally think about that as creating the rapport and the depth in a given moment, so we can both say that I don't know what I'm doing here. You don't know what you're doing either? Okay, good, cool. Do you want to go and figure some stuff out together? Great. And that's what it felt like to me when you shared that. Does that resonate with you? Do you pick up on that same thing? Because I want to see if there's something else here that I can grab a distinction from.
Yes, and as we say in improv, the distinction might be, and I suppose now I want to bounce a question back at both of you because I'm not really familiar with which sort of school of coaching you're from, but you remember that for many, many years, in fact, the stereotypical client coach relationship is not one of friendship, it's pure professionalism. And I remember my very first counseling appointment when I was going through a divorce and I was very vulnerable. The person sat there and she happened to have big glasses and for some reason it magnified her eyes. So she looked like a big bug to me. And I was afraid to be vulnerable because she was a stranger and it was like, okay, this is who I've been assigned, from this practice to see. And I didn't know her. And surprising to me, she peppered me with all these questions. And I couldn't feel really a reason other than I was told to bare my soul with this person. I had a real hesitancy because she wasn't giving anything back to me. It was all going to be cold. And, when the bell rang, it's like your time is up and it was goodbye, see you next time. That, I will tell you, was a very unsatisfying progression times of counseling. It didn't help me at all.
Yep. For me, I did this. If anyone's listening, I'm putting my arms up because it's the barrier goes up because people's defenses tend to go up. And once the defenses go up, it's the opposite of that vulnerability and nothing gets in. Because she could have been saying all the things that you needed, all the questions that you needed to answer. But because you didn't feel comfortable and you couldn't be that person, then it makes no difference because it's got to start from that place of opening. So that I love the thought process of that, and I wonder as well. Just kind of flick back to the ribbons of vomit, if we may, because that's just where my head went. You can clearly articulate that moment now, Candy. At the time, could you see it clearly? Because I wonder. For me, I think about moments which have been the serendipitous moments, the forks in the road. The changes and just the one step here versus one step there. As I go back and reflect on them, the more I pick them out, the more focused I get on them, the bigger they tend to get. But at the time, didn't feel like that. Didn't feel as big. So I wonder what that experience was like for you.
All right. Well, I have a few thoughts on that. First of all, I think that depending upon who you are, I've heard people who don't ask the big universal questions of who am I, where am I going, what is life about? Some of these people don't even ask that question till they're on their deathbed. And I've been a nurse for a long time. I've seen a lot. Whereas I recall, and maybe because I'm adult child of alcoholics, I was asking those questions earlier. And also because my grandmother took us to church, I was exposed to those kinds of questions. Wasn't always happy with answers that I didn't understand, but I was asking those questions. And I think that in the case that you're asking about, in the Ribbons of Vomit day, my calling day, I was already at the point in my career as a flight attendant. At that time, I had worked about 4.5 years as one and lived in 6 different cities all over the world. And I was ready for a change. I think my biological clock was ticking. And so it was only about 6 more months, and I was effectually, interestingly enough, got married and started the prerequisites for nursing school at the same time, within 6 months. So it was something that was already back there, and I maybe was looking for it, although not consciously.
You say the words ready for a change, that's maybe the indicator of like, well, you're kind of looking for it at the same time. So when those moments happen, it's easier to accept them for maybe what you're looking to see anyway. And then you just take the ball and run with it there. And I'm wondering, because there's a few more moments along that journey after that, like fast forward a couple of years, I'd love to hear what you're up to now, because, well, maybe you can tell us, who's Florence Nightingale?
Well, there again is another story. Florence Nightingale is most widely known as the icon of the nursing profession. In the mid-1800s, she took a group of 38 nurses over to Turkey, outside of the Crimean Peninsula where the war was going on, because that's where the military had set up a hospital. And she was much more than, she was a social reformer, really, which is why she actually, if you look at all the things that she did or accomplished, as you would say, in her long life, she was 90 when she died. She was so peculiar for her lifetime in the Victorian era, when women had a second-class status. Women were not allowed into university, although her father thankfully understood that she was really bright and had different aspirations. Right away as a youngster, she felt a definite yearning to help some of the poor people that lived, it was kind of, if you can imagine Downton Abbey, they lived in these big houses. She came from a privileged background, but they would do charitable work with the poor people who lived there. And she started writing copiously about it wasn't enough. She wanted to raise the standards for people who did not have means as she did. This she did in many different ways. And the first was to buck the system. And she decided, even though she wanted to get married, she decided that God had called her to a new path, and that was to help women and poor and all people of the world, as it turned out, since Britain, had an empire sun to sun. And so after she came back from the Crimean War, she established what is now still the Nightingale School of Nursing there at St. Thomas's. And Nick, you're English, right?
Yes.
You are? Yeah, so you probably knew about this. Where are you from?
Essex.
Essex. Okay. So yeah, she was I'm sure I don't remember how far that is from. That's in the area where Liverpool is, right?
Now, Essex is southeast. Actually, it's very close to
Oh,
London.
that's on the other side. Okay, I'm sorry. Well, at any rate, she didn't go far from London when she came back because she was ill.
Yeah.
So in 1856, when she came back, she was ill, but she had made a friend of Queen Victoria and became an ad hoc counselor to the viceroys of India and all of these other doctors and people who were trying to help the colonial masses who were under the British rule. And she did it quite effectively from her sickbed, essentially. So she's a wonderful woman. And my third solo show is based on her 200 books and articles and over 10,000 letters that I happened on.
Well, can you give us like a little glimpse? I know we got to wrap up here and I want to grab some takeaways, but so what is a solo show? What do you mean by that?
Well, as an actor, if you're the only one on stage and you write it, then that's a solo show. So of course, this is my third, and I've used these as a vehicle, as my little tagline is blending art and science for positive system change. And so each one of those solo shows is another story that I won't go into, but each one has helped to gather together the thoughts of different thoughts. And in this one, it is the whole point of the Florence Nightingale show is to help people understand that the problems we're seeing today, and ever so much, even in the COVID pandemic time, are unusual, but the circumstances really, whether it's healthcare or population health in general, health affects every one of us. And she gives a lot of encouragement and education. And
I love that. So
that is that.
As we begin to grab some takeaways, are you doing the show now? Where can we find you? Can we follow you somehow?
Yeah, people can go onto the website florencenightingalelive.com and see some video clips. Because it's COVID, we've gone virtual. And that said, she is pleased to travel. We traveled, mid-November. We were in Atlanta for the first time in 2 years with a big audience of 7,200 nurses. And now my agent and I are crafting the tour for 2022 and 2023. So if people are interested, they can find us through florencenightingalelive.com.
So cool. Thank you for sharing. And for takeaways, I rarely do this, but I want to nudge Coach Nick in the direction of his takeaway here because it's so crazy. You said, can you say it one more time about art and science? I want to make sure I get that statement right. What you said.
Blending art and science for positive system change.
And so Coach Nick and I have had several conversations over the last couple of weeks about this very thing. So Coach, if you don't mind, just elaborate a little bit on that.
I find it fascinating to unpack what success is. And one of the constructs of creating the external success is modeling others. So if you can do what someone else has done, then you can get similar results. What's the science behind their art? Step 1 through 10, do those things, get those results. And so some people spend decades or their life exploring into their art to eventually be able to reverse engineer the science from the art, if you will. And it's I think it's a beautiful thing to play with because they're completely different, right? Like in their experience. And if you got the science, you can borrow the science from someone else's art and then use the science to create your own art. And it's just coming to me, it's somewhat of a cycle as well, right? So maybe that's where the blend comes from. So thank you for sharing, Candy, that next level distinction for us of the blend of those two there.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so a takeaway for myself today would be just to elaborate a little bit on the line of like being ready for change. And when we reflect on these serendipitous moments, it's funny how we have to be ready for them to happen. So I've been kind of thinking about that since we talked about that earlier in the conversation. I think what I'm going to try to do is always be ready for change, always be looking for that moment. Like just have an expectation that serendipity could happen at any time. And when it happens, I'll be ready for it. So that's just something that I'm reflecting on. I'm going to take that away from today's conversation. So Candy, if you could, open-ended here, if you want to give a plug for, you've written several books, if you want to talk about those, or a reminder of a principle that we've hit in this conversation, or advice you might share, just take it away, final takeaway from today's conversation.
Well, I would say, to add to what you two have said, there is a principle also that sometimes when you're ready, that means you're ready for whatever life brings. And as a grief counselor, I've been working with people lately. Boy, there's a lot of people who are really struggling right now during COVID. And several of them are struggling with losses that they didn't think that they were going to have. And I'm talking family members who died suddenly, or because it was a long time and whatever, because of the pandemic, maybe they didn't get to see them. But several of them, that was a theme that I've just been noticing in the last 3 people I talked to just in the last few days. It's a sudden death. And how do you cope with a sudden death? One of the things that I say is and it's not a new idea, when you're grieving, when you're stressed, when you're anxious, it's because the normal has been stripped away. Whatever you depended upon with that relationship has gone. And so the antidote, I think, is that it's not about you. We grieve and we go through the stages, right? That the beginning of healing comes with thankfulness. And I tell all my people to have a gratitude journal, even if it just seems it's hard to even put 3 things down. We can find 3 things. And of course, the neuroscience again says, when we get the science, that's take care of yourself, eat a little something, do some walking, get out in nature. All of these things are not new, but it's focusing outward, because when we're isolated, and ever so much right now, we're not meant to be isolated. We're meant to be in community. And here's the funny thing, and I don't know if you know this, but I ran across this research recently, and that is that people who don't know each other, who come together in community, even as strangers, if they sing together, they bond. Isn't that interesting? So having holiday get-togethers, singing together, it's why people do that in houses of worship, because it's a bonding, and it starts those happy hormones percolating. And that's the neuroscience that helps you get over the slump.
I love that so much. I would ask Coach Nick to come up with a song that we could all sing together, but unfortunately, we're just out of time today. I'm so sorry, guys. Dr. Candy Campbell, thank you so much for joining Truth Seekers. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you for watching another episode of Truth Seekers. We appreciate your interaction. So please comment, like, subscribe to YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want more, check out some of our links to our masterclass, The Achiever's Mindset, and come join our LinkedIn group. And what do you want to see more of? Remember, we're here to share the simple secrets of successful. So help us do that. What do you want to see? What do you want to see more of? Thanks, and see you again next time.